Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. More than 1.1 million additional economic impact payments disbursed under the American Rescue Plan. Payments total approximately $164 million. IR 2021-103, May 5th, 2021, Washington. Today, the Internal Revenue Service, the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and the Bureau of the Fiscal Service announced they are disbursing more than 1.1 million payments in the 8th batch of economic impact payments from the American Rescue Plan. So we are on EIP, Economic Impact Payment number 3 here. They're sending out batch number 8. So if you haven't received your economic impact payment at this point in time, or you know someone that hasn't, maybe it's in this batch. Let's read further as to what will be included in this batch. Today's announcement brings the total disbursed so far to approximately 164 million payments with a total value of approximately $386 billion since these payments began rolling out to Americans in batches as announced on March 12th. If you want to look at those announcements, there is a link to them here. The 8th batch of payments began processing on Friday, April 30th, with an official payment date of May 5th, with some people receiving direct payments in their accounts earlier as provisional or pending deposits. Here is additional information on this batch of payments. So what's it include, you may ask? Here we go. What's included in this batch? Batch number 8 of the EIP 3. In total, this batch includes more than 1.1 million payments with a value of more than $2 billion. More than 585,000 payments with a value of over $1.2 billion went to eligible individuals for whom the IRS previously did not have information to issue an economic impact payment, but who recently filed a tax return. If you know anybody that is still in this category, in this situation where they haven't received their economic impact payment, possibly even any 3 of them, round 1, 2, or 3, due to the IRS not having their information, then you might want to let them know about it, because it does look like there's still people that the IRS is getting information from. They've been trying to get the information from these individuals for quite some time, really since the first economic impact payments went out. They had the non-filer tool that went out, and they've been working with other departments such as Social Security and whatnot to send out the payments even if they don't have the information with relation to the tax returns. And then they've been trying to get the tax returns for those that they don't have their information. So if you know someone, or if you do not have your economic impact payments round 1, 2, or 3 due to the IRS not having your information, the remedy is to file your tax return for 2020. Remember that as you do so, these economic impact payments are getting a little confusing because they're tied to different years and they're prepayments. So round 1 and round 2 are actually prepayments of the credit that's tied to the 2020 tax return. If you had not received round 1 and round 2, you need to file the tax return, and you will actually calculate those economic impact payments in the format of a recovery rebate credit for round 1 and round 2. Round 3 is actually tied to the 2021 tax return that wouldn't be filed in 2022. However, they're going to use 2020, or they had used 2019 if they didn't have 2020. But if you don't have either one of them given to the IRS, then they wouldn't have that information. So the remedy would be to file round 2020 for round 3 as well, even though you will have nothing directly related to round 3 EIP or recovery rebate credit related to round 3 on the 2020 tax return, because the IRS will then take that information and they should be able to automatically give the prepayment based on the information you give for the 2020 tax return, so that you do not have to wait for the remedy to be filing the tax return in 2022 for 2021 in order to get the third payment. So bottom line, if you haven't gotten the economic impact payments round 3 or any of the prior ones, the remedy is to file the taxes, and there is free file software that you can look up on the IRS website if your income is below a certain threshold to do so. So this batch also includes additional ongoing supplemental payments for people who earlier this year received payments based on their 2019 tax returns, but are eligible for a new or larger payment based on their recently processed 2020 tax return. So it looks like they are still doing what they're calling the plus-up payments here. This is another very predictable situation that happened, because when the round 3 of the economic impact payments went out, they went out before many people had filed the 2020 tax return, and of course they're prepayments, in essence, of the 2021 tax return. So they based that information then, whether or not someone would receive the payment or not, based on the tax return they had, which for most people was 2019. However, 2019, it's quite possible that the income was higher than in 2020, when really people were hit by the economic impacts of the downturn, and therefore they may have hit an AGI limitation on the 2019 tax return and therefore not received the full amount or any of the economic impact payment. But if it had been based on 2020 data, considering their income would have been lower, then they may have been receiving the payment. So what's the remedy for that? The remedy for that is to file the 2020 tax return so that the IRS has it. Again, we're talking about EIP 3. For EIP 3, the third economic impact payment, if you got it lowered, you didn't get the full amount because there was an AGI or income limitation on 2019, but your income was lower in 2020, then if you file the 2020 tax return, you won't have anything about economic impact payment 3. You will have stuff about economic impact payment 1 and 2 with regards to the recovery rebate credit if it's applicable, but not 3. However, as you file the tax return, the IRS is saying that they should automatically pick up the fact that your AGI is lower on 2020 than 2019, and they should be able to make the remedy, the adjustment on their side for that without, again, you having to wait till all the way to the end of the year to adjust it with the recovery rebate credit for round 3, which wouldn't happen until the 2021 tax return filed in 2022. So again, the remedy is typically to file the 2020 tax return if there are any problems, including a lowering of the payment due to an AGI limitation based on a prior year, such as 2019. So this batch includes more than 570,000 of these quote plus up end quote payments with a value of nearly $1 billion. So overall, this 8th batch of payments contains about 600,000 direct deposit payments with a total value of $1.1 billion with a remainder on paper payments. Additional information is available on the first 7 batches of economic impact payments from the American Rescue Plan, which processed weekly on April 23rd, April 16th, April 9th, April 2nd, March 26th, March 19th, and March 12th. You can look into all those batches that went out if you want to. It's really interesting stuff here. So the IRS will continue to make economic impact payments on a weekly basis. Ongoing payments will be sent to eligible individuals for whom the IRS previously did not have information to issue a payment, but who recently filed a tax return, as well as people who qualify for quote plus up end quote payments. So they're still processing those payments. Most of the people that have filed the tax return and qualify hopefully should have gotten their payments at this point in time. But if you have that plus up situation, or you haven't filed the tax return and the IRS doesn't have your information to process the payment, then file the tax return. They're still working on those. They're still shooting out money like crazy, cranking out checks and direct deposits and stuff going out from the Internal Revenue Service. So, special reminder for those who don't normally file a tax return. Although payments are automatic for most people, the IRS continues to urge people who don't normally file a tax return and haven't received economic impact payments to file a 2020 tax return to get all the benefits they're entitled to under the law, including tax credits such as 2020 recovery rebate credit, the child tax credit, and earned income tax credit. So note, again, the idea here being that I want to make a distinction between whether you're required to file and whether you will benefit to file. If you ask the question and you look up on the IRS website, am I required to file if your income is below a certain threshold, the answer is no, meaning the IRS is not going to take action against you if you don't file with your income below a certain threshold, because you don't owe any taxes at that point in time. They're not going to take action for someone if they don't owe taxes, even if they have some refunds that would be eligible to them. So the other question is it worthwhile? Will it be beneficial for me to file a tax return? Is much different. You could very well be in a situation where you're not required to file, but it could be quite beneficial to file the tax return. And it would be quite beneficial in the case where you have these refundable type of credits, which would include the earned income tax credit, possibly a child tax credit. And if you haven't got the economic impact payment, possibly then the recovery rebate credit, or 3 credits that, again, aren't really refunds. In the sense that your liability could be 0 and you still might get money, meaning you're not getting money back in that case, even though it's still kind of called a refund. It's more like a benefit program at that point in time. But just note that, it's worthwhile to check out to see if you're going to get access to those credits. And there's software that's free right now because you can go to the free third-party software to take a look at it. So the recommendation would be to look at the 2020 software, get access to it now that if it's free to you at this point in time. Take a look if you qualify for some of these credits, like these refundable credits. And if you do, then you might realize that your prior tax returns, which you were not required to file, but may benefit from filing, you might want to go back there and take a look at them. Note, if you do decide to go back, then you might not have access to the free software. You might have to, pay for it. You might get your refund and pay for the software at that point in time and see if the prior years were good, if that's one way that you can move forward with it. Also note that if you don't have your tax information, you might be saying, hey, I don't even save my tax information because I'm not required to file, so I don't even know what I'd need. You in that situation, for the older tax years, the IRS has copies of the information as well. So you could basically go to the IRS website and possibly look up the transcript information on the IRS website. That's not the first resort you want to do, because first of all, you'd like to get it from whoever issued it to you, possibly because you might need state information as well, amongst other things. It'd be easier to get it there. But note that the IRS does typically have the information as well, so you could go there if you need to try to figure out what it is you need to file your actual tax return. Okay, so filing a 2020 tax return will also assist the IRS in determining whether someone is eligible for an advance payment of the 2021 child tax credit, which will begin to be disbursed in this summer. So they're also thinking about this prepayment for, well, looks like they're doing it, the child tax credit. So once again, that's a credit that's usually, there's a refundable portion to it for a child tax credit, and usually you don't get it until you file the tax return. And we're getting a bunch of these situations where they're basically saying, we're going to try to get the money out sooner. So the way they get the money out sooner are these prepayments. So they're trying to send it out to you before you file the tax return, which is kind of confusing, actually, because then, of course, when you file the tax return, you have to determine whether or not you already got the money. And you have to know that when you file the tax return, you're not going to get that same amount of the child tax credit, given the fact that they gave it to you already beforehand. So you got to, keep that in mind. It's a prepayment. But if you qualify for that, however the payment works out, you want to make sure that you have the information to the IRS so they can do it whatever way they want to do it, as long as they're sending the money out and then a little prepayment at the tax credit. So if you have the information, they should be able to process that. So for example, some federal benefit recipients may need to file a 2020 tax return, even if they don't usually file, to provide information the IRS needs to send payments for a qualifying dependent. Eligible individuals in this group should file a 2020 tax return as quickly as possible to be considered for an additional payment for their qualifying dependents. So this is a common situation as well, because many people that don't normally file because they don't need to file and they possibly get benefits from something like Social Security, then the IRS still sent out the economic impact payment because they based it not on the tax return but on the Social Security payment information. However, if that person also has a dependent, then the IRS wouldn't know about it because they don't have the tax return, so they wouldn't know about the dependent. So once again, the remedy for that situation, in order to get the recovery rebate credit related to the dependent, is to file a tax return and give them the dependent so that they can then process the payments related to the dependent. So people who don't normally file a tax return and don't receive federal benefits may qualify for these economic impact payments. This includes those experiencing homelessness, the rural poor, and others. Individuals who don't get a first or second round economic impact payment or get less than the full amounts may be eligible for the 2020 recovery rebate credit, but they'll need to file the 2020 tax return. See the special section on irs.gov claiming the 2020 recovery rebate credit if you aren't required to file a tax return. So if you haven't received the first or second round economic impact payments, and even the third round, the remedy is pretty much always at this point, file the 2020 tax return. Pretty much the solutions are to file the 2020 tax return, although what will happen on the 2020 tax return will differ. For round 1 and round 2, you will actually calculate EIP 1, EIP 2 in the form of a recovery rebate credit on the tax return. Round 3, you will not, but after you file, the IRS should be able to remedy any situations on their end, hopefully, including AGI low-income limitations that cause them not to send out the economic impact payment, or if they just didn't have the information, then they should be able to send it out. Or if there's a dependent thing going on, they should be able to send it out. So, problem with the EIP payments 1, 2, or 3, file the 2020 tax return seems to be the remedy for pretty much every case, or most cases at this point in time. So free tax return preparation is available for qualifying people. If you want to take a look at the free tax return options, there's a link to that here. The IRS reminds taxpayers that the income levels in the third round of economic impact payments have changed. This means that some people won't be eligible for the third payment, even if they received a first or second economic impact payment or claimed a 2020 recovery rebate credit. Payments will begin to be received for individuals making $75,000 or above in adjusted gross incomes, $150,000 for married filing jointly. So there's an AGI limitation. $75,000 starts to phase out. It caps off at $80,000 for people that do not file married filing joint. And then if you do file married filing joint, it starts to phase out at $150,000, caps off. You don't get anything, in other words, after the $160,000. So individuals can check the Get My Payment tool on irs.gov to see the payment status of these payments. Additional information on economic impact payments is available on irs.gov. There's also links to that stuff here, and there'll be a link to this in the description.